In progress. Recording in progress.
All right. Afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I know folks are still joining us, but wanted to go ahead and get started just in the interest of time. My name is Catherine Kemp, and I'm the Director of Veteran Services here at the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. I am thrilled to be joined by such a robust team this afternoon who will be presenting. I am also joined by one of my dear colleagues, Emily Van Etten. She is on the communications team here at NHPCO, and we will both be monitoring the chat box. So first, just a couple of housekeeping rules before I hand things over and we get started. Again, I do want to encourage everyone to please utilize the chat function. Say hello to your colleagues, give us feedback, comment on anything that's happening during the presentation, and of course, feel free to ask us questions. I know first and foremost, I will answer the question on everyone's mind, slides in the webinar recording. We will not be providing the slides from today's presentation. However, we will be posting a recording of the webinar, as well as links to all of the resources that are named. So the webinar following the recording will be posted on the Soul Injury page of the We Honor Veterans website. We will post that in the chat box, and then also on the Opus piece resources as well. So just an FYI for that. Thank you to everyone who is commenting that they are muted and their videos are turned off. Yes, we will not have an opportunity just with such a large group. We want to be mindful of everyone's time for an open discussion, but maybe that's something that we could explore down the road, and Deborah and I can talk about following the presentation. But without further ado, I do want to give a quick introduction to someone who perhaps needs no introduction. Deborah Grassman is someone near and dear both to the NHPCO family, but also to my heart. She has been a friend, a colleague, and a supporter to not only myself, but my family over the years. And we are always thrilled when she offers our partners and the community, a presentation. So we are very thrilled to have her here. For those of you, just in case you don't know or need a refresher, Deborah Grassman is the founder of the Opus Peace organization. She is a mental health nurse practitioner whose 30-year career of Veterans Affairs included being the director of the Hospice program, as well as personally taking care of more than 10,000 dying veterans. She is recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in caring for veterans nearing the end of life. She's also a TEDx talk presenter, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen that yet. She is also a contributing author in 4 textbooks, has 25 published articles, 5 documentary films featuring her work, and on and on. This woman's powers and talent and knowledge just have no boundaries. She's perhaps most well known for identifying the unique needs of veterans as they near the end of life, which has become the basis for NHPCO's We Honor Veterans program, and was also instrumental in introducing pinning ceremonies to honor dying veterans, something that I know many of you are familiar with. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Deborah Grassman.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you, NHPCO, for what you are doing to serve veterans. And I thank all of you taking time from your busy schedules to learn about how to serve our veterans and their families. I hope that today's program will challenge some of your assumptions that you have about veterans that may be impacting your practice. And Catherine asked me to do this program this week because Memorial Day is coming. And so I'll start by wishing you happy Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day? Is that the feeling that Memorial Day should elicit in us? Is a happy Memorial Day happy because we get a day off from work or a picnic with our family? Does happy describe what a veteran feels? This is a picture of the Bay Pines VA Cemetery where I worked. The scouts put the flags on the graves, and flagging the graves is a way to teach kids that Memorial Day is not about being happy. It's about being thoughtful and respectful. So as this Memorial Day approaches, I hope that you will challenge your thoughts, your practices, and your feelings about veterans. So what I'm going to do is to ask you some true-false questions. Now, I don't want you to just sit there and wait to be told the answer. You'll discover your hidden assumptions if you will just simply answer quickly off the top of your head, take the risk to be wrong, and that will allow you to see your blind spots, which is where your assumptions are. So here's your first question. The VA cares for most of America's dying veterans. True or false? Now, most people say true, because that would seem logical, but it's actually false. Only 4% of veterans die under VA care. So you who work in community hospice, you who work in community living facilities, you take care of most of America's dying veterans. And because you do, the Department of Veterans Affairs reached out to NHPCO 20 years ago to form partnerships with you so that we could do hospice care together. And this was a formalized initiative called the Hospice Veteran Partnership. Now, I know many of you are already involved with the Hospice Veteran Partnerships in your area, and if you are not, you might want to consider it. And we have just the person who can tell you why you would want to get involved. We are fortunate to have with us today Diane Jones. Diane is the community hospice consultant that the VA used to forge hospice veteran partnerships. And I'm going to let her tell you a bit about that endeavor. Diane? I'm not hearing you, Diane, if you can take yourself off mute.
I did it.
There you go. You're good.
Swore to myself I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to be that person. Oh, well. Okay, so thank you, Deborah. Several years ago, while on a New York State Hospice Veteran Partnership conference call, one of the community hospice members posed this question. My agency's leadership has been asking me why we should continue to be in this HVP. What can I tell them? So this is what I call the WIFM question, the what's in it for me. In this case, it's the leaders legitimately wondering how using agency resources on a veterans program will benefit the agency. After all, belonging to an HVP uses scarce agency resources like money, time, materials, data management, and personnel. It requires additional staff training to learn about the unique needs of seriously ill veterans, as well as the unique needs and culture of the VA. And speaking of VA, it also requires coordination with this huge complex, a government agency that historically hasn't had to, or maybe didn't know how to, coordinate with community providers. It also asks us to communicate and collaborate with our competitors. Oh my, so what's so great about collaboration? All right, think about it. This is a recent example of the importance of what collaboration can do. It was only through collaboration that the world's pharmaceutical companies were able to develop COVID-19 vaccines in record time. If each company had tried to do it on their own, maybe we'd still be waiting Yes, being competitive is essential to the success of any business. But is there any way to balance the competition and collaboration to both meet the needs of our nation's veterans and our own agencies? In other words, is there a way to move from what's in it for me to what's in it for us? First, hospice veteran partnerships can share their resources to educate and collaborate with VA and with each other. Every community really has more veterans than a single agency can accommodate. So no one organization in any community can do it all. Every veteran deserves, right, to have competent veteran-centric caregivers. So shared education and training can spread this across many providers, as well as help ensure continuity of care across settings. Second, the Veterans Health Administration is the largest integrated healthcare system in this country. For most of its existence, as you probably have experienced, it has been a relatively closed and insular system with limited interaction with the community. And on top of that, VA providers are not particularly interested in getting what might be referred to as a sales pitch from individual agencies. The advantage of HVPs is that they offer a common place for VA and community providers to develop relationships and exchange information about policies, reimbursement, and sharing the care of our veterans. So collaboration and competition can coexist. If we compete with ourselves first, think QAPI, our community will know it. And we can brag about it. We can all work together to meet the needs of our veterans, honor them, and thank them for their service to our country. Oh, and there's one more thing. Having the skill set to care for and honor our veterans just feels good. Knowing what to do after you ask the questions on the military history checklist, holding a pinning ceremony, locating a lost medal, pairing a veteran volunteer with a veteran patient, securing needed but unclaimed benefits. All of these activities that benefit veterans and their families also have a huge positive impact on staff. And that's priceless. Deborah?
Thank you, Diane. So now you've heard from the expert on HVPs, and I hope that if you haven't already gotten yourself involved in an HVP in your area, that you will join one, or if there's not one in your area, you'll start one. Now, Diane mentioned pinning ceremonies, and it was Diane who recognized the value of the pinning ceremonies that we were doing at our little hospice at our VA, and she operationalized it by raising awareness about those pinning ceremonies to hospices within the whole NHPCO network, and voila, almost overnight, our little pinning ceremony was everywhere. And what's more, you all enhanced it. And I hope you feel proud about that. And I'm going to let Kelly Keller, the volunteer coordinator at Endless Journey Hospice in Omaha, tell you how they do it. So Kelly.
Thank you, Deborah. Endless Journey Hospice, like most of you on this call, utilizes and prioritizes the pinning ceremonies. It's one of the first things we try to do. We have blankets, like many of you, that are made for our veterans by volunteers. We have a script we use when presenting the blanket that I will read in a moment. Humor me for a second. Pretend that you are a veteran on hospice and how these words might feel to you to hear. This blanket was handmade by our civilian volunteers especially for you. We chose those words on the star with care. At ease. The words you welcomed to hear from your superior officer, meaning you did not have to stand at attention, you could relax. It is our hope that at this time of your life, any burdens you still carry can be laid down, and you can rest in the notion that you serve to the best of your ability, and your legacy is known and continues in those who serve today. Our social worker and chaplains also know when this pinning has taken place if they were not in attendance, and are sure to follow up and ask if that pinning brought anything forward to their minds. One time, the social worker followed up with a Vietnam veteran. John, at the pinning ceremony, you said something that struck me, and I wanted to ask you about it. You said this was a long time coming. Is there more you'd like to say about that? Opening this door, the veteran talked openly about his lack of homecoming and eventually, quite honestly, about his mixed feelings about the impact his service had on his life.
Thank you, Kelly. I love the thoughtfulness with how you at Endless Journey have crafted your at ease message and the ceremonial way you deliver it. The focus that you have on what is their unfinished business. And the most important lesson you're teaching us today is that presenting the blanket is not the goal. The goal is to help veterans come to be at ease. The blanket is a means to help achieve the goal, to open the door to a meaningful conversation. What you are doing is creating a safe, emotional environment for troubling memories to surface, not to push. I think we do damage when we do that. And I also think we do damage when we don't know how to create a safe, emotional environment so those memories can come forth if they so choose. Inviting that story should be a hallmark of any level 5 hospice. And your social worker and chaplain who follow up if that veteran is not at ease is crucial. And I'm sure the family will appreciate the respectful reminder of the blanket, even after the veteran dies. Well, I want to introduce you now to Angie Snyder with Beata Home Health and Hospice. Angie, I know you do bedside ceremonies with your veterans, and you do a special ceremony for Vietnam veterans, and not even COVID kept you from providing these services. I still think of the Vietnam veteran that you welcomed home in spite of what seemed insurmountable odds at the time. Can you tell us about that?
Thanks, Deborah. So certainly the pandemic brought about challenges for continuing to honor and provide pinning ceremonies and opportunity for our veterans. And so I'm a QA director, so I do not spend a lot of time at the bedside, but I always say I moonlight once in a while on a weekend where I'll go out and see a patient because I just miss being at the bedside. So I visited a patient at the very beginning of the pandemic who, as soon as I walked through the door, I noted that he was actively dying. And I had read in his chart that he was a veteran, so I knew a little bit about him. And I spent a lot of time speaking with his wife, who really wanted to do life review. And several times throughout our conversation, she brought up the fact that through his lifetime, he really struggled with the fact that he was a Vietnam veteran. And he was treated poorly when he returned from Vietnam, and he never really felt like he could be proud of the service that he provided during his time in the military. And so I knew his time was limited. Of course, it's a Saturday, and I wanted to be able to do a pinning ceremony and a bedside welcome home ceremony. So one phone call and the team, the hospice team that I work with, jumped right into action. And within a matter of an hour, we had planned a pinning ceremony. And we knew it was important to bring this family together. And remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody's on lockdown. Our agency is only allowing one person to go into the home. This gentleman had a daughter who was very connected to him, but unable to visit. And so we were able to be innovative and use Zoom. So we brought the hospice team together on Zoom. We brought the family together via Zoom. I have my computer set up in the home at the bedside so they can see everything that's going on, so that everybody could truly be a part of it. And I also knew that the Vietnam piece would be very important for this veteran. And although he was nonverbal and actively dying, I wanted him to be welcomed home. So I worked with another Vietnam veteran who gave me special permission to present the Vietnam beads. As you know, these beads are meant to be made by a Vietnam veteran and presented from one Vietnam veteran to another. I am not a veteran, but had permission to be able to present these beads on her behalf. And so as I got down beside him and pinned these beads onto his shirt, I welcomed him home and offered an apology on behalf of our hospice team and on society for the scorn and the indignities that he had to endure when returning from Vietnam, and I welcomed him home. And believe it or not, he was able to lift his upper body up off that bed, which shocked all of us who were witnessing this, and whisper the words, "Thank you." And his wife said for the first time, she really felt like he could be proud of the service that he had provided. And I was able to take a deep breath, knowing that I was able to give him the welcome home that he truly deserved.
Well, you have Marie and I both here in tears, Angie. Marie was that Vietnam veteran that gave you permission to do that. And welcoming our Vietnam veterans home is so crucial. We have witnessed the type of thing that you saw many times. And so I hope this will inspire the rest of you to think about the special needs of our Vietnam veterans. Thank you, Angie. All right, so moving on, everybody take a deep breath after that. Next question. Most combat vets have PTSD, true or false? What do you think? False. Statistics are that about 25 to 30% of combat vets suffer PTSD. So most do not. Take home point, when someone says that they saw a dangerous duty assignment, don't assume that they have PTSD. They probably do not. How about this one? Veterans admitted for hospice services should be assessed for PTSD, and if they have it, they should be treated for it. True or false? False. At the end of life, your approach to PTSD should be the same as you do with all health issues at the end of life. In other words, respond if there are bothersome symptoms that are affecting their quality of life. If it's not affecting their quality of life, you really don't need to delve into it. Hospice patients are not coming in for treatment of their PTSD. You don't need to do an in-depth assessment. Just ask them if there's anything from their military service that's still bothering them. If they have PTSD, they will tell you about it. Take home point. Just because you've received some training on trauma-informed care doesn't mean that you now put on a trauma lens and you sleuth it down. Yes, it needs to be on your radar. No, you don't need to delve into it if it's not troubling the patient and or the family. How about this one? Treatment for PTSD is the same at the end of life as it is earlier in the life cycle. True or false? False. trauma looks different at 2 stages of the life cycle, with children and with the dying. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual says that children tend to act out the trauma. And guess what? That's often what dying people do also. They act out the trauma, and the acting out often manifests itself as agitation. So the treatments for PTSD that work earlier in the life cycle may not be effective now. And instead, whatever you can do that will help the veteran feel safe, such as the anchoring heart technique that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. Also, PTSD treatments don't address the moral injuries and the soul injuries that sometimes haunt veterans and surface at the end of life. Next question. Most veterans are male, true or false? True. And because that's true, we commonly generalize that to forget that women are veterans. Take home point. Just because most veterans are male, you can't assume that the female person standing next to you is not, right, Marie?
Right, right. You're correct.
Marie is a Bronze Star recipient, combat veteran. Now, for me, I have always found women veterans interesting, especially those who served in World War II. I think about the culture of 1940s America, when women were encouraged to be housewives and silently support their husbands. Yet here were women who defied the culture, sometimes defied even their parents and their peers, and they marched off to join the ranks, and not in small numbers either. More than 400,000 women served during World War II. And these women often have a strength and a sense of self that caused me to compare their constitution to my own at that age, an age when I was busy trying to please and conform. So these women often were cast from a very different mold. And I want to introduce you to one of my favorite veterans. She was my next door neighbor for several years. Her name is Memory Wilkes. She was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and she was a 3-war combat veteran serving in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, taking care of what she called affectionately my boys. So this is a picture that was in the Tampa Tribune when she retired from MacDill Air Force Base. Later, she moved a few hours away from Tampa, and I didn't get to see her very often. But at age 91, she suffered a heart attack, and her nephew called me, and I went to be with her in the hospital. She was weak and she was confused, and she didn't recognize me initially when I came in her room. But then she said, "You're a nurse, aren't you, Deborah? At the VA, right?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Yes, Memory, the VA." And I crawled into bed with her, and I laid my head on her shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and I said, "Is it okay if I get in bed with you?" And she said, "Yeah, it feels good." And she was kind of patting my arm, and we talked about dying. She said she wasn't afraid to die, that she was ready. She said she'd spoken with her pastor. She told me that she could feel her mother near. And then she told me that she wanted to go to the VA to die. She said, "That's where I belong." Now, normally I would have thought the same, but I knew she only had a day or so to live and the trip would be too difficult. So I said, "Well, I wish that could happen too, Memory." And I kind of snuggled in close to her. I said, "But you're too weak to make the trip. It'd be too hard on you now, and that's why I'm here." I said, "The VA came to you." Well, Memory relaxed in my arms, and I began to massage her back. And, you know, it was not that sharp, jerky motion massage, but rather that long, slow, easy movements of my hands, fingertips never leaving her skin. And through it all, she kept saying, "Oh, that feels so good." And I said to her, "Think about all those soldiers that you nursed, Memory. You called them your boys. They're all here now. They're all thanking you for the care you gave them. They're all saluting you and waiting for you to come home with them. It's your time, Memory. Go on home to be with your boys. Memory relaxed, nodding that she understood. I kept massaging, occasionally urging her on with, let go, open up. It's okay. Relax. Memory died the next day. After her funeral, her nephew came up to me and he gave me her dog tags. He said, she would have wanted you to have these. I wanted to have them too. No doubt, Memory played a role. I was only about 25 years old when I first met her. No doubt she played a role in the decisions I made later. All right, how about this one? Veterans are the best caregivers of patients who are veterans. True or false? The answer is a little trickier here. It depends. You know, there is a camaraderie among veterans that immediately strengthens trust and relationships. Veterans can relate to each other in ways that civilians simply can't. But I offer a few cautions. I have seen elder care agencies assign professional caregivers and volunteers who are veterans to patients who are veterans. And that's great if the veteran caregiver or volunteer is trained in how veterans' needs change as they age. First of all, you have to make sure the veteran caregiver is capable of not projecting their own military experience onto the veteran they're caring for. Yes, there are commonalities with all veterans, and every veteran is unique, is different. The caregiver or volunteer can't assume the patient had the same experience. And the caregiver has to be especially cautious about projecting their own experience onto the patient. So a volunteer who had a great experience in the military, and most did, may try to minimize or even negate what a dying veteran might try to tell them about their negative military experience. Caregivers have to be non-judgmental, even curious, and seek out differing opinions of the patient. For example, a caregiver might be a great patriot and not want to hear that the military does anything bad, so to speak. If a dying veteran wants to express something bad that happened to them, the caregiver might verbally or non-verbally shut them down, and the story remains untold. And lastly, veteran staff and volunteers have to be willing to learn a new skill set. For example, if a dying veteran starts crying, expressing the grief that he or she has for all the losses they're experiencing, how do you think an untrained veteran volunteer might respond? They're probably going to say something like, suck it up, or keep up that, some kind of keep up the stoic front type of response. Keeping up stoic fronts can interfere with peaceful dying. Next question. You can go overboard honoring veterans. True or false? This is true. You may remember on the last NHPCO webinar that Opus did that I told you the story of Larry Berg. This is a picture of Larry on your screen. Larry felt proud of his military service, and there were some ugly things that he did not feel proud of. He reminded us that not all veterans want to be thanked, and we need to know how to create safe space for the ugly stories. So Kelly, I know that Larry's story had a big impact on you and your practice, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Thank you, Deborah. Yes, my contribution to this portion of the discussion stems from an administrative meeting we were having regarding our recent commitment to level 5. And people on the team thought, wait, Level 5, that means go harder, bigger, stronger. So we ended up brainstorming more ways that we could throw praise and honor and glory at our veterans. Let's have a parade. Let's be sure our logo is front and center on veteran events. Every single time we discuss the patient, maybe we should address them as veteran so-and-so. I became increasingly uncomfortable. And indeed, Larry came to mind. I was blessed to spend a week with him in Opus Peace, and he did impact me. And I thought to myself, would Larry possibly feel silenced by these activities, as he says he doesn't fit the mold? Proud of his service, you bet. Changed by his service for the better, to be sure. But wanting to be honored for it at every step of the way? I don't think so. His service included ugly memories of fellow service members who did not act honorably. His recollections of the ugly truths are important to his healing journey. To have it all be washed over in the image of veterans that makes us feel more comfortable, a la Captain America, that doesn't honor him. It might even bring shame. As a mother, I liken it to the hallmark holiday of Mother's Day, which at times serves to further isolate the mother who doesn't feel the warm fuzzies of adoring children at all times. I also thought of the veterans we serve who are also quite proud, if not more so, of other roles they played in their lives. Careers in the railroad, fatherhood, grandmother, husband, avid fisherman, a career in the ministry. In fact, this very week, I was talking to a son about honoring his father's service, a father whose World War II bomber service inspired all 4 sons to go into the military. But what the son said was, that'll be great. But what Dad was really proud of was being a Freemason. My own father, who served 2 years between Korea and Vietnam, and who spent most of his adult life trying to stop our country from engaging in war, would not be okay being identified as a veteran above his role as a husband, a father, and a peacemaking citizen of the world. As I talked to Deborah about my misgivings, I realized that out of our efforts to make sure that we see the veteran in front of us, which we hadn't been doing historically, we might overshoot the mark and forget to see the whole person.
Again, thank you, Kelly, for sharing your keen insight. You make an excellent point. I remember one time when I was heaping praise on a veteran and he said to me, look, you don't need to thank me for my service to this country. It was only for 2 years and it happened 50 years ago. He said, if you want to really thank me for the 40 years I spent as a school teacher. He said that was the sacrifice. And on some days it was even heroic. So yes, Kelly, I am glad we are no longer ignoring veterans. And I'm glad we are having this conversation about the deleterious effects when we overemphasize their veteran status so that it overshadows their other accomplishments and sacrifices. Next question. It's important to learn the military lingo so you can establish trust with veterans. True or false? Answer is false. And there's several reasons. Number one, there are so many acronyms that not even veterans know all the acronyms. And number two, veterans are very forgiving. They don't expect you to know all their acronyms. In fact, they sort of take pride that you don't know. So if they say an acronym that you don't know, just ask them what it stands for. But the main reason you don't need to go down the acronym road is this. This is hospice care. Put your training time and your energy into what's going to help veterans in hospice with their unfinished business. You don't need to try to impress them with how much you know about military culture. They'll be more impressed when you are simply authentic and tell them what you don't know because you haven't been there. How about this? Agitation can be a symptom of terminal restlessness. True or false? True. It's not unusual for dying people to become restless, sometimes even agitated, and it's called terminal restlessness, and it usually responds nicely to a sedative type of medication. How about this one? Agitation can also be a symptom of PTSD, moral injury, or soul injury. True or false? Well, that one is true. The trauma injury, the moral injury, or the soul injury memory gets stored in the body and is unconsciously acted out in the form of agitation at the end of life. Now, if you give a sedative to a patient with this kind of agitation, it might have a paradoxical effect. In other words, rather than calming them down, it actually makes them more agitated. Why? Well, Bessel van der Kolk says that PTSD is largely caused by helplessness. As people come to the end of their lives, they become more helpless. And that helpless feeling acts as a trigger for the trauma or the moral violation or the violation of their own personhood. And then sedatives will make that person feel even more helpless, which makes them fight even harder to stay in control. So distinguishing terminal restlessness from the fear of helplessness is often inherent with people who suffer PTSD or moral injury or soul injury. That differential diagnosis is important. So, you know, hurting people often hurt other people. And when you peel back the layers of anger, hate, and agitation, you'll often find loss and hurt. And if you can discover those stories, help them release those stories, you'll be helping people to die healed. Let me give you an example of how past trauma can become unleashed in the form of combative behavior. A state veterans home had asked me to come train staff in how to better care for dying veterans. And they also wanted me to meet with a patient named Barry because he had aggressive and combative behaviors. Now, the hospice team and I met with this 92-year-old World War II veteran. And initially, Barry and I talked about his relationship with his 3 estranged sons, all of whom lived in the area, but had not visited him in 10 years. We also talked about his anger at being confined to the nursing home. Then I asked Barry about his military service. And Barry answered by proudly saying, "You want to hear about my 3 Purple Hearts and my 2 Bronze Stars?" And I said, "No, right now I'd be interested in hearing about things from World War II that might still be troubling you now." Well, Barry's pride quickly turned to hostility. And he said, "You mean all of it? All of it troubles me." And he fiercely swung his head around, bringing his face in close to mine. I didn't say anything, but my eyes opened in surprise, and I motioned for him to go on. He said, "Do you know what it's like to put a gun in the middle of a forehead and pull the trigger?" And he literally put his finger in my forehead and pushed my head back. Well, I got to tell you, I was really taken aback. I didn't say anything, but I had this unwavering gaze that let him know that I could take it. Well, then he kind of moved back in his wheelchair, and he told me this story about how he and a buddy had been ordered to patrol an occupied city. The names of the occupants were posted on the doors of the houses. And they had gone into one house, however, and they found 3 teenage boys whose names were not on the list. And Barry said to me, "They weren't supposed to be there." And the other soldier that I was with asked me what we should do with them. And so I told him, "We gotta peel them." And then he looks at me and he says, "Do you know what that means?" Now, in all my years of VA service, I had never heard that term. So I shook my head no. And Barry came in close to me and he said, "It means you shoot them in just the right place in their skull that their head splits open and their brains come out." Oh my God. Barry saw the tears that kind of came to my eyes as I imagined this shocking carnage. And then he said, yeah, you see, do you want to hear more now? And I just shook my head, no. I told him, I said, I can't hear anymore. I mean, I was at that point on emotional overload. Well, seconds ticked by, and we sat locked together in silence because I wasn't sure what to do next. And then finally, instinctively, I knelt down in front of him. I placed my hand firmly on his heart while my eyes peered closely into his soul, a place beyond the anger and the venom that he was spewing forth. And I said, Barry, I am so sorry that you were put in a position to see and do the things that you had to see and do at that young, tender age. I am so sorry that you had to go through that. Well, Barry sort of slumped forward into my arms and he just sobbed. And he was sort of shaking. And then he said, I'm shaking. I can't quit shaking. And I responded, that's okay, Barry. Let yourself shake. Just breathe deeply as you shake. Breathe and shake. And we are all going to breathe and shake with you. And that's what Barry did for the next several minutes. And afterward, he looked up with amazement at the team surrounding him. A team who had the courage to bear witness to his story without judgment. So did Barry have PTSD? I don't know. I didn't assess him for that. I didn't need to. I would guess he did, although it had never been diagnosed. Did he have a moral injury? Yes. He had not signed up to kill 3 defenseless teenagers. It clearly violated his moral code. Did he have a soul injury? Losing a sense of who he really is? Probably. The fact that he had 3 estranged sons, all of whom lived in the area, tells me that his anger and bitterness had probably left his real self imprisoned behind unmourned loss and hurt and unforgiven guilt and shame. Now, what about when he asked me if I wanted to hear about his 3 Purple Hearts and 2 Bronze Stars? Anyone surprised that I said no? Want to know why I said no? Well, first of all, because he offered it so readily, I knew it was foremost in his mind, something he was not hiding, something he probably told others about. Now, on the other hand, I've been with veterans who did not want to talk about their Purple Heart that their family had told me about. And in those situations, I ask about it. You know, I'll say something like, I understand you received a Purple Heart for your service in Korea. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Now, the other reason I didn't want to hear about the Purple Heart is because I only had half an hour to be with this man. I had already been told he was agitated and combative, and he was a hospice patient. I needed to remember that my goal with a hospice patient is to determine if there's any unfinished business that might complicate peaceful dying. I didn't want to waste time on issues that were not bothering him. I needed to create safe space for his untold story, whatever was still bothering him. So can you see how important it is to distinguish between soul injury, moral injury, and PTSD? If it's a soul injury, you want to spend your time on the unmourned loss and hurt and the unforgiven guilt and shame. And part of the handouts you're going to receive include this chart that will help you. The approaches are different, and that's why it's important to distinguish between these different wounds of suffering. So the question to ask yourself is this: what assumptions are you making that might be interfering with your ability to create a safe, emotional environment for a veteran's story? Whatever it is, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. Do you have a prejudice to only want the good stories, the patriotic stories? If you can expand your capacity to bear witness to whatever a veteran might want to tell you, then you will become an instrument of peace. So where does healing begin? Well, there's a famous saying that says, You can't heal what you don't feel. This is the cornerstone of healing. And because of stoicism and fierce independence, it's especially hard for veterans. I want to introduce someone who has strategized with her team exactly how to create safe space for veterans. Karen Ken is the Director of Hospice Services at Beata Hospice in Pennsylvania. Karen, I love some of the training you're doing with your staff about how to create safe space for the untold story of veterans to come forth. And if you can, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about that right now.
Hi, I've worked hard with my staff on knowing how to both honor a veteran and allow them the space for their burdens to come forth. We take our level 5 status in the We Honor Veterans program very serious. During our pinning ceremonies, we say, is there anything from your time with military that is left unsaid or undone? I'm fortunate as a director of our hospice program to be able to attend many of the pinning ceremonies. I was attending a recent pinning and we offered the pin and provided the honor this veteran deserved. I then knelt at his bed so we were eye to eye and asked this question. Is there anything from your military service that is still bothering you or that you would like to share? This man became very quiet and I sat silently at his bedside, respecting his need to think about the question. He finally looked up at me and said, yes, I want to say something. He went on to tell me how he was in the Army during the Korean War. He was not actually on the front lines and he felt some guilt about this. I acknowledged that guilt and he began to tear up. I asked permission to place my hand on his heart and he agreed. He continued to explain he was a pilot and it was his job to pick up the bodies of the soldiers who died in combat. Clearly, this was hard for him to express. I continued with my hand on his heart and looked at him and acknowledged how difficult it must have been to have that job of being the person to transport the bodies of deceased comrades. I also acknowledged how difficult it must have been to have no time to grieve their loss, as he had to keep going back to get more bodies. He cried a long time and slowly looked up and said, thank you. I have never been able to share this with anyone before, not even my family. I was so humbled by his courage that he allowed me to be part of acknowledging that hurt he had been carrying for so long. We sat in silence as he cried, and I anchored his heart, reminding him to feel his pain. Creating a space is such a basic tool with such a large impact that each of us has the ability to do.
Everybody, deep breath. Thank you, Karen. You have given all of us the recipe for creating safe space. And I thank you for your courage to bear witness to his pain and also to help him bear witness to his own pain. Thank you for teaching your staff how to create safe space for those untold stories that might still be troubling them. And I know it can be intimidating to invite those untold stories because people are afraid they're going to open up a can of worms, right? And if you have any of that concern, it's a legitimate concern. And here's what I would say to you. Open yourself to the veteran, just like Karen did. Want to hear them. Be willing to ask the difficult questions that no one else asks. Ask about the worms. If they don't want to bring out any worms, respect that and don't push them. But when the worms do come out, don't be afraid. Ask the person to describe the worms. Ask them to feel the worms. Feel the worms with them. Tell them you're sorry they've had such a wormy experience. Ask them what they want to do with the worms today and how you can be helpful. Tell them you appreciate their honesty in acknowledging their worms, their courage in opening the can, and their humility in asking for help to bring the worms out in the open so they can be used to aerate the soil. And I always remind personal and professional caregivers of veterans that the most effective and authentic way to help others with their worms is for them to practice abiding and reckoning with their own worms. Because the paradox is that once we do that, we can then go fishing with our worms to help others. We can use our own wounds to connect with others. So I want to spend some time talking about a simple technique that you can use to help people stay grounded when those worms come out. It's called the anchoring heart technique. And there are 3 steps. The first is to simply anchor your heart firmly and tenderly, and you can do that with one or both hands, and to breathe deeply. And the second step is simply to connect with whatever you are honestly feeling, even if it's just for a few seconds. And the third step is to simply become curious about the place inside you that is not afraid of these feelings, even hurtful feelings. In other words, instead of numbing uncomfortable feelings, you want to develop the capacity to let peace and pain sit side by side together. And the way to do that is to ground yourself whenever fear of distressing sensations arise. And when you do that, then what you'll be doing is training the brain to have a different relationship with that fear-based amygdala part of your brain. So we're going to take just 2 minutes to do this. So if you will, just settle into a comfortable position. We're only going to do this for about 90 seconds. If you will, first just lower your eyes or close them completely, whatever you prefer. And place one or both hands firmly and tenderly on your heart. And breathe deeply. Breathe deeply. And as you are breathing deeply, take a moment to let yourself feel whatever you are feeling. You know, maybe you feel a little silly doing this, or maybe you feel relieved to take this pause. Maybe you feel pressured to do this when you don't really want to. Maybe you resent being told to do this. Whatever it is, just be open to it. Be real. Be mindful of that feeling. Now relax your breathing and let your body breathe however it wants to. And just pause for a moment to be still. Let yourself become curious about the place inside you that is strong enough to hold whatever you are feeling without fear. Connecting with this place inside you that is not afraid of your emotional pain. Okay, take one more deep breath, bringing this feeling with you as we close out our time together with a few examples of how to use this simple tool. You can also do the anchoring heart technique with others by simply encouraging them to do it with themselves. You see on your screen Sue Gibson with the Indiana Hospice Veteran Partnership and her Vietnam War husband, Bruce. They are at a fallen comrade ceremony, anchoring their heart because they were getting ready to listen to a difficult story told at the podium. And so we had them anchor their heart ahead of time. You see on your screen myself anchoring Marie's heart. Marie's a Vietnam veteran. She was triggered at a SOCOM conference when they were reenacting a terrorist attack. And Marie, you remember that day well and what happened and how that helped her to stay in her own skin. Well, Marie, I want to introduce you to another combat veteran. Shannon Morlock is a community educator at Smoky Mountain Home Health and Hospice in Tennessee. And I'm going to let him tell you about his experience with the anchoring heart technique. So Shannon.
Deborah, thank you very much for having me, and welcome everyone from God's country, as I like to call it, in the Smoky Mountains here in East Tennessee. Opus Peace was doing a presentation at our hospice organization. And I'll be honest with you, after 20 years or more actually of medical sales, the thought of having to do another training session really didn't flip my trigger too much. I was thinking, oh great, just another training session. And I didn't think that, through the training as a community educator, that I would really be involved in this very much, only to find out afterwards it had everything to do with me. You see, I am a combat veteran. I served in your United States Air Force as a combat controller during Desert Storm. Many of my memories while being in Iraq and Afghanistan and several other posts during my tour, I put back in what I call my ultra personal file in my mind. I've had a wonderful career since my Air Force time, but I never allowed a lot of the things that happened in the Air Force to come forward. On only 2 occasions have these memories and thoughts and fears came out. Once was while having dinner with a group of friends in a restaurant like any place else. And a friend of mine who was a police officer was giving detailed description of an accident that he had came upon. As he was giving these detailed description, if you will, I immediately found myself kind of closing in, almost disappearing within myself. I was with friends, people who loved and cared about me. The second time it occurred was actually during this Opus Peace presentation that Deborah was doing. Deborah did a great job, as she has today, in talking about veterans and their undying memories, and she even gave some very good examples as she has today. And as I was listening to the examples that she was giving, little by little I could picture the outside world just kind of squeezing in, if you will. And once again I found myself back in Iraq. I could smell the burning fuel from a flight of 12 A-10s that I had called in to do an airstrike on approaching enemy troops to our location. I could look around and I could still see the bodies on the ground. I could feel the tension that was coming on me. The smells, the intenseness. I remember seeing an Iraqi soldier who had lost the lower part of his extremities, but he was in shock and was still trying to light a cigarette. Those memories were still so strong. Little did I know that while I was experiencing this in front of my colleagues, my superiors, all in this meeting for Opus Peace to try and learn about this, that I would all of a sudden become the center of the attention. Thank you, Dave. But you see, this time was different. More than before, when I was at the dining room having dinner with my friends, this time I didn't feel alone. You see, Deborah was there and she recognized what was taking place. As I left Iraq and came back to our classroom where we were doing the training, I admit I started to feel embarrassed what had just happened. I was in front of my partners, and I started to tell them a little bit about what was going on with me at Deborah's encouragement. As she placed her hand over my heart and gave that soft, gentle pressure, and I could feel her hand on my back. The easiest way I could tell you is all of a sudden, that comforting gave me a secure feeling. I simply felt secure. I wasn't afraid, and little by little, I came back to the classroom. Then another odd thing happened to me. My embarrassment started to leave because now my colleagues were asking, how are you feeling? What are your thoughts? And like many veterans, I guess we all have the same, why me? Why was I spared? Why did my partner, my buddy, get killed or injured, but not me? Why did I get to come home with all my limbs and still able to work and carry on another career? Those thoughts come back occasionally. And now that I have learned the anchoring heart technique, and as you saw just a moment ago, I've taught that technique to my son. He's 11. And he now knows when I have one of these episodes, what to do and how to help his dad. The reaction from everyone in the room for me was pure love. They did not hold judgment. They did not look at me as different. And to this day, I still get messages and calls from my partners, just with the little thing of, I'm thinking of you. How's your day going? The anchoring heart technique in Opus Peace is something that I truly believe in, both for our veterans and for anyone towards the later stages in life who may have suffered some type of trauma from their childhood and growing up. Thank you, Deborah, for taking care of me that day.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. And he mentioned something that I just want to point out, that, I didn't know Shannon at all. We were complete strangers. So when I saw what was going on, I didn't come in from the front. I actually held his heart from the back. And in the military, we even say, I've got your back. So I initially placed my hand on his back, and I could feel him kind of relax under my touch. And then he went on into his feelings, and I could see the tears. And then as I could feel him feeling more secure, I brought my other hand in from the front on his heart. So I kind of had him cradled in that security, but always feeling how he was reacting to me. If I would have felt him pull away, I would have come out immediately. It's always sensing how they are reacting. So at any rate, thank you, Shannon, for telling us about how truly to let pain and peace sit side by side together, right in the moment. That's the beauty of the anchoring heart. It's right in the moment. No special equipment, no special tech, just right in the moment it can be used. So one of the things I want you to know is that Opus Peace has a free video that teaches the anchoring heart technique. So you can find it on our website. Catherine's going to also provide it on their website. And I would certainly use this for in-services and other things to teach. All right, we're on the home stretch. We have one last assumption that I want you to watch out for, and it's this. Veterans have a worse death than non-veterans. True or false? The answer is tricky again. It depends. As we've already talked about, if there are unbidden memories that surface that cause agitation, then indeed that death might be worse than yours and my death is going to be. But often veterans have a better death than you and I are going to have. Why? Because unlike most of us, they have faced death before, and so they're not afraid of it. Let me close with a research project that will help you better understand. Dr. Luann Conforti-Brown is a professor at the University of South Florida, and her doctoral dissertation is entitled More Than a Flesh Wound, Narrative Descriptions of Combat Experience and Spirituality. Now, she did a qualitative research study interviewing combat veterans about how their experience of combat impacted their spirituality. Now, one of the things I found fascinating was this. The things that Dr. Conforti Brown was reporting with young combat veterans who were not dying, was the same thing that I was witnessing. My veterans were at the end of life and they were facing imminent death. The veterans she interviewed were young and facing the threat of death. Let me give you one narrative that she reports from a young combat veteran. This is what he says. I was probably most at peace when I knew I was going into harm's way, because I kind of got my mind right. And I said my prayers. I got right with my maker. I made sure things were lined up because I've got a child. And whatever was going to happen was going to happen. This is the same thing that I was seeing with my hospice patients. In both groups, you can see how their perceptions of time changed and they worked to complete unfinished business. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen. You see, this is living in the now. This is living in the soul. This is the experience of timelessness. This is what I've witnessed repeatedly with veterans who are dying. So I'm going to close our time together with an archetypal story, because myths and archetypes often convey the essence of the soul's eternal now. So I want you to listen to this mythological story, a story whose wisdom often eludes the logical mind, but comes to resonate with the soul. Once upon a time, there was a farmer who had a prized stallion. One day, the horse ran away. A neighbor offered his sympathy for the loss of the treasured horse. And the farmer said, you never know. Well, the next day, the horse returned, bringing a beautiful wild mare alongside. Well, the neighbor offered congratulations on the farmer's new acquisition. And the farmer replied, you never know. Well, a few days later, the farmer's son broke his leg when he was thrown off the wild horse. And the neighbor offered his condolences. And you know what the farmer said? He said, you never know. Now, not long after, the army came through the village conscripting young men to fight in the war. But since his leg was broken, the farmer's son was passed over. Well, once again, the neighbor noted the farmer's remarkable good fortune. And the farmer said, you never know. Do you see how this mythological story says the same thing that the combat veterans that Dr. Conforti Brown interviewed said? These two seemingly divergent stories that seem to have nothing to do with each other offer oneness, offers integration of mind and soul. And it just so happens that we have Dr. Conforti Brown with us today, and I'm going to ask her to make the final comments about whatever she might want to say to you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah.
So in listening to all of the very profound stories, and then reflecting on the narrative, which was one of quite a few narratives that I collected. And in this kind of research, then you just sort of go over and over it again to find meaning themes, because the goal is really to try to get inside the lived experience that these were veterans. So they were not dying, they were not, in that final stage of the life cycle, but they were all veterans. Therefore, they had more perhaps of an opportunity to reflect on some of this. And something that was very common and common across all the narratives and all of the interviews were something that Maslow, who of course all of you that are social workers, pastoral counselors will certainly understand, Maslow called them peak experiences. Viktor Frankl called them threshold experiences. And it's really those moments in our mundane existence, our day-to-day life, that the ontological reality, the something different, the transcendent, the sacred, comes crashing into our reality. And that's an experience that within combat, within that life and death, there's a greater opportunity in many ways to experience that kind of a mode of being. Now, particularly, I was reminiscing a little bit about the particular veteran that the quotes come from that Deborah was discussing. And it took him a long time to really be able to stop and think back and move through each of those experiences. And he gave me this composite, which is what you see on the screen, of what it was like in every instance. And these happen to be guys that were in that special forces, special operations community. So they went on a lot of direct missions. They were called out, and they knew when they were called out, there wasn't a lot of downtime. Everything was moving. In those moments, upon reflection, what they realized was when that other reality, that kind of bigger life and death reality that moves you beyond the mundane happens, you're probably in the middle of something that doesn't give you an opportunity to sort of process and think about it at that moment. But if you don't take the time afterwards, when you do have a little bit more time, those are the kinds of things that really sink deep into your unconscious and start to emerge through a lot of the different kinds of injuries that we look at when we talk about moral injury, when we talk about soul injury. These are the things that are juking you. These are the things that are staying inside you because there was this moment when the veil lifted. And if you don't have an opportunity, if you don't take the time to turn toward that and not simply distract yourself from it, not just simply move away from it and never move back to it, now you're going to be seeing the remnants of that kind of repetition, particularly at end of life. Because when Maslow was looking at peak experiences, it's the aging, the loss, getting a diagnosis of something, and certainly death and dying, right? These are the moments when you can transcend and start to understand the deeper meaning of your life. The problem is, that's a tough thing to do. I mean, it's a lot easier to distract yourself. It's a lot easier to just sort of move along and say, oh, wow, oh, I just felt this, but okay, now I'm going into the action phase, not the contemplation phase, not the processing phase. And Deborah and I had been talking about it, and I realized that there's kind of a parallel between the individual experience of these moments and sort of the larger systems. And what I mean by that is, as I, by trade, am a clinical social worker. So I spent many, many decades doing, individual, family, group work, and working with traumatized populations. And I realized that systems often want to aid and abet the process of distracting away from those threshold moments because it's harder to deal with. It's, the combative veteran that Deborah went in and said, let me just sit, let me just maintain presence with. But we do this in lots of ways. We want to medicate pain away. We want to gloss over suffering and just give you a coping mechanism, but not allow you to delve deeper into it to really get some knowledge and understanding that could be transformative. It may not be pretty and it may not always feel great, but what I learned in doing a lot of the collecting of the narratives, and then of course, the assessment and the interpretation of the narratives, particularly from this population of veterans, is that if they don't do it, that's the kind of stuff that is sinking back within them and really emerging as all of the unmourned loss and grief, all of that. I'm going to ignore it until it becomes so overwhelming, or I am at my most vulnerable and no longer can do that. And that's not a process, I think, that anybody that goes into the professions that we look at as helping really want to be engaged in. So thank you, Deborah, for the opportunity to expand a little on some of the themes. And that was a very, very common theme.
Well, thank you, Leanne, for the research that you did. You really are describing the life of a hospice worker, because as you said, that's when people are most vulnerable. That's when this stuff surfaces. And we do have to be careful that we're not using our veteran honoring and trying to honor them in such a way that it is a distraction or takes them away from those ontological experiences that those threshold experiences that might still be lingering in. So we want to be careful and know how to do both. Well, I'm going to close with a slideshow. You're probably going to think that this is a slideshow about veterans, but I chose to not do one about veterans. I really chose to do one about all of you, because I'm no longer in clinical practice. I don't go into a hospital every day or a hospice every day or a home every day the way you all do in this last year and a half. And so I have such utter respect and honor for the work that you all are doing right now. And so this slideshow Opus piece created to pay honor to all of you who are caring for our hospice patients.
Sometimes I'm in pain and I try to explain how I feel. I know that you love It's my soul that I'm revealing, so I don't need a lecture or a plan. I need a witness. I need a witness. I need a witness. Oh, I need a witness.
So this video that you just saw is also available as a gift from Opus Peace to all of you that you can share with others, share with your staff, as we have all become scattered in so many different ways on different levels through this pandemic, and a way for us to grieve and be able to come back home to ourselves. So Catherine, anything from you? Catherine Kemp?
Oh, I just want to say thank you again so much, Deborah, and all of our panelists today for joining us and sharing your experiences and stories. I know they mean a lot to us, and they've meant a lot to all of the We Honor Veterans partners and just staff and folks who were able to join us. So sincerest gratitude from all of you. Again, this will be posted. I know a lot of people had to hop off, and I know a few people have already tapped me saying that they would like to watch it again. So again, a reminder, it will be posted on the Opus Peace resources page on the We Honor Veterans website, and on the Opus Peace website as well. So you can find it in both spots. Again, it's a gift from Opus Peace to you all. Thank you again so much to everyone. If you have questions or you want to learn more about Opus Peace, the organization, or about trainings or soul injury, feel free to reach out to Angie at opuspeace.org. That's ANGIE at opuspeace.org, or reach out to the We Honor Veterans team. We'll be happy to send you all their way as well. And with that, I wish everyone a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and a wonderful week to you. Take care.